All right, so we've just seen that the surface of the plasma membrane is covered in proteins and carbohydrates. However, the plasma membrane itself also has several extensions that function in different capacities. So these three projections or extensions of the plasma membrane are microvilli, cilia, and flagella. So let's take a look at microvilli first, and we'll work our way down this list. So microvilli are often described as bristle-like extensions of the plasma membrane. So if you're talking about more than one of these, the term that we want to use is microvilli. So microvilli is plural, but if you're just referring to a singular one, you would refer to it or call it a microvillus. The function of microvilli is to increase the surface area of the plasma membrane. So it makes a lot of sense that we find these structures in areas where absorption is important. So the kidney tubules are lined with these cells that contain many microvilli, and what their job is to do there is they're reabsorbing water and small ions and things like that from the filtrate that the kidneys create, and whatever remains in that filtrate will be lost to the body as urine. And so the job of the cells there in the microvilli is to absorb as much of the water and the ions as possible, so that way our body can retain what it needs and it doesn't unnecessarily lose it to the urine. We also see microvilli in the intestines, like the small and the large intestines, where they absorb nutrients and water in those locations. So that's microvilli. Let's turn our attention to cilia, because we actually have two varieties of cilia. We have motile cilia and non-motile cilia. So motile cilia, as their name implies, are capable of movement. So this word motile just means movement, and so these are cilia that are capable of waving and beating. So they are described as whip-like extensions of the plasma membrane that wave rhythmically. So they look pretty similar to microvilli, except microvilli cannot move at all. And so in that way, cilia are different. And instead of functioning in absorption like we saw in microvilli, they function to move substance. These motile cilia function to move substances across the surface of the cell. So we talk substances like water or mucus or body fluids and things like that. So they're moving these substances across the surface of the sheet of cells that contains cilia on them. So they're found primarily in two locations. They're found in the respiratory tract, like the trachea, where they function to propel mucus that has captured any kind of dust, dirt, or bacteria. And they propel that mucus that has captured those debris and bacteria, and they move it up the trachea away from the lungs. So that way that material does not make its way to the lungs, where it could potentially cause infections, or it could potentially interfere with normal lung function. So we find cilia, motile cilia, in the trachea of the respiratory tract, and we also find them in the female reproductive system. And in particular, they're located in the fallopian tubes, which function, the cilia in the fallopian tubes functions to move eggs that are ovulated from the ovaries towards the uterus, where they can be implanted. So those are our motile cilia. Our next variety here is non-motile cilia. And non-motile cilia, as their name implies, are not capable of motion. They're pretty much the same in terms of structure, other than the fact that they can't move. They're also described as whip-like extensions of the plasma membrane that do not wave. Non-motile cilia in particular are located in a structure within the inner ear called the vestibule. And the vestibule functions to detect movement of the head and acceleration like that. So this is kind of what contributes to our balance and equilibrium. And so we find non-motile cilia there that bend in response to movement of the head. So the cilia themselves don't bend. They simply are bending in response to the movement of the head, and that's what detects balance and equilibrium for our bodies. And last but not least, here we have our third cellular or plasma membrane extension, called flagella. Now, flagella are pretty similar to motile cilia in that they are a whip-like extension of the plasma membrane that moves and beats rhythmically. However, their purpose is a little bit different in the body, which we'll get to in a second here. So, similar to microvilli, the term flagella here is referring to multiple flagella. So this is the plural form of this word. If we're just referring to one of these, we would say flagellum, and that would just refer to a singular flagella. So there's only one type of cell in the human body that has a flagellum, and that is the human sperm cell. And that is because these are the only cells in the body that can essentially propel themselves by this mechanism. So there are other types of cellular movement within the body, but those cells move in a way that does not use cilia or flagella. So each of the human sperm cells has a single flagellum that propels it, and we only see one flagellum per sperm in the human body. So it's important to remember here as we wrap up this section is that cilia propel substances over the surface of the cell. So the cells in the human body that contain cilia are stationary, and the cilia are only serving to move substances like fluids or mucus across the surface of that sheet of cells, and the cell stays put in one place. Whereas a flagellum propels the entire cell. So the flagellum is propelling the cell itself through the body.